So after 2 weeks of no William Kedjanyi, he's back just as Act of God wins at Bellewstown as we record the return of the polling station. The man that's clearly superior to God, William himself, is back in the house with me, Johnny Ward. How are you, William?
I am all right. I have to just put on the record that I am not a deity nor superior to any god. So getting that disclaimer out there. But no, I am well, thank you. How are you?
Good, I'm good. Warm weather in Ireland, lots to look forward to on the racing front. Obviously, the Premier League has just recommenced, and we've a lot to look forward to at Star Sports over the next while. I was just talking to you pre-show about the book Landslide, which is the latest of Michael Wolff's 3 books on Donald Trump, in which he speaks about a man who's effectively deranged. And the review of the book I read went on about how Wolff is almost more sympathetic towards Trump than actually angry at him. But at the end, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, he's a great chance of running for the next election.
Yeah, the whole Trump 2024 bandwagon, I think it's been taken far more seriously, and actually it's a good I mean, I wouldn't say it was something to look forward to from a personal point of view, but it does lead in well to our theme today, which is basically what to look forward to in terms of political betting over the next few months.
What have we got to look forward to, William Kedjanyi? We have very interesting situations where Joe Biden is under massive pressure, obviously, in the States. It's been a poor enough run of it as well for Boris Johnson and a bit of a bump for Labour. But on the European front, there's a lot happening as well, particularly in France, I would argue. Fascinating election coming up there. What do we got?
Yeah, we do have the French presidential elections, which will become bigger and bigger in the horizon. But top of the list are 2 elections taking place on different continents. The first is in Germany. The German federal election is going to
the end of Angela Merkel.
The end of Angela Merkel. The end of an era, and really an era in which she came and saw a politician from, I think, pretty much every other G7 nation, or every nation from the G20, I think, come and go. It's a big change for Germany. It's a big change for Germany. Merkel has been, actually, deity is probably an interesting comparison, because she has been, the face of Germany for decades, through incredibly difficult times, which are continuing with the floods and, of course, the pandemic still very much taking a hold in some places. So this is a really big election for the future of Germany. It's a really big election for the future of Europe as well, with Britain now gone from the EU. The role that Germany plays has only increased. And interestingly, Germany's centre-left Social Democrats, known as the SPD, have pulled ahead of the Conservatives, Angela Merkel's party, for the first time in 15 years. Just a month before Germany goes to the polls, they go to the polls on September the 26th. Merkel has been in office for 16 years. She steps down, 4 straight national election victories, but it is a tight old one. It's a tight old race, because the SPD...
It's really interesting as well, just as she steps down, that you mentioned those floods, which, I understand are one of the most dramatic kind of aspects of climate change to hit Germany in a long, long time. And the timing is interesting, because I think if there is a seminal year for climate change, 2021 has been it, with just so much happening, and obviously the big report we've just seen. But it's interesting that Angela Merkel can reflect so much in terms of happiness on the years that she's had, but she can't do anything about climate change effectively at this stage alone. And that's just right at the end of her sort of tenure, is this massive flood, which will have focused a lot of German minds in that regard.
Indeed. I mean, some are saying that Armin Laschet's ratings have tumbled because he was caught on camera laughing during a visit last summer to a town hit by floods. And it's interesting that the SPD candidate Finance Minister Olaf Scholz, I hope I've got that right, has seen personal ratings rise. There is literally 1% between them, with the latest Forza poll for TV in Germany. And the Greens are down a point, but still at 18%. This is going to be a close run thing. There's no question, by the way, of any of these candidates being ditched or whatever. Jens Spahn is health minister. He's a close ally of Laschet. He's ruled out any suggestions that replacing him and would, gettable, comfortable victory. But it's really important. It's really going down to the wire, and it will be a pretty intense betting heat, I'd imagine. And hopefully we'll have odds at Star Sports soon.
Roughly, if you're calling it now, how would you price it?
If I had to price it, I would go odds on, just slightly odds on, maybe 4 to 6, 4 to 5, Laschet to be the next Chancellor. I'd have Scholz probably about 7 to 4. I think you can go 12s, maybe even 14s bar. I think there are only really 4 in it, and really it looks to me to be a bit of a 2-horse contest, and that's in terms of the next Chancellor, which I think everybody will be focusing on. There will be prices, and hopefully we'll have prices on who wins the most seats. And I'd say the CDU would be, again, odds on, but I wouldn't go ridiculously short, bottle on tops, maybe, with the SPD, maybe 9 to 4, something like that.
So I presume when you were talking about this other continental major election, you weren't talking about the recent one in Zambia?
No, I was not. No disrespect to the people of Zambia, but I was talking about Canada, which is having an election. It's
another country massively badly afflicted by climate change this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's been worldwide pretty much. I mean, it has been worldwide for ages, but we are seeing much bigger and more dramatic events. I do not doubt that will push the green agenda, or basically plans on climate change and climate change policies, very much to the forefront, and make it, if it wasn't already before, a top 3 issue, perhaps as important almost as healthcare, or the economy. Of course, the 3 I think are very much interlined. This is going to be, I think, an unpredictable and volatile general election. Naturally, Ipsos Mori polled for Global News in Canada, and they said that despite a Liberal lead of at least 5 points over the Conservatives, those are the 2 biggest parties there, they say that public opinion is showing some movement, and it's also interesting that only 45% of those polled were certain of their vote choice, and at least 13% of the country's eligible voters remain undecided so far. So you could see some really big changes in the polls, and some really big changes in the markets. And I would not be surprised if either the Liberals and Conservatives came out on top. And I think that will be something to look really closely towards. And I think, something that will provide an opportunity, definitely, for those who play. So I think that's a really big contest and a really important one too. Those 2 are over the next month, so do make sure to be keeping up to date with the latest polling, coming back to the polling station where hopefully we'll have experts and guests, and waiting for the markets to be launched at Star Sports as well.
Is it a volatile time for global politics in terms of, maybe old kind of hegemonies are changing or whatever? And, as you say, there is going to be a big swing towards green everywhere, I guess.
It's a volatile time in global politics. Whether it means hegemonies are changing is dependent on other structural issues. For instance, in Britain, we're coming up to, I think we've not coming up to, but we've had over a decade of Conservative rule in some form. At Westminster, they are still pretty clearly ahead, albeit facing challenges. The SNP have been in power for a long time as well. Indeed, there are pretty strong enclaves, basically, where certain parties do dominate, but you are seeing some volatility definitely across Europe, and you're definitely seeing it elsewhere too. And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they say a week is a long time in politics. I think that's recently, over the last few years, changed to a day or so. Can change really quickly in politics. So I think definitely you are going to see more events that would turn the odds one way or another. But as to whether it means that we're going to see a lot of governmental turnover, I wouldn't be so sure. I think you should take it on a country by country basis when you're looking at how you're going to analyze or play the markets, and look at the other factors as well.
Obviously, Afghanistan has been, absolutely dominating the news for the last week or two, and Joe Biden's handling has been described variously as a disaster, botched, rushed, whatever you want. But I guess there's a theory out there that this will all sort of, die down in time, and Biden will ride the storm. But it has been a bruising start to his premiership in this regard.
It has been, and as for it dying down, I'm really not sure. So other stories will eventually become the leading item. That's just how news works. But I don't think people forget Afghanistan. And generally speaking, even though foreign policy doesn't tend to be the number one concern amongst the American electorate, it's hugely weaponized, and it tends to be quite legacy defining. Every US president, and to be fair, lots of major politicians who ran for president or were vice president or ran will eventually get pulled up on their record when it comes to foreign policy. The 2022 midterms, it might seem a fairly long time away, but that's only 18 months. Will people really have forgotten the images that we've seen over the last week? Not really. There was an argument, I think, to be said that Vietnam and the pullout there emboldened parts of the American right, who used that as an electoral weapon. We have Benghazi more recently as well, and then you have, I think, the weaponization of the pullout from Iraq was used by Donald Trump in his campaign. So I think eventually, this is absolutely not to demean the issues there, eventually another story will come and be front page news or whatever, but it will leave a really bad mark on the Biden-Harris administration, and it's been a struggle for them recently. Yeah, it's been a big struggle there, and if you liked Harris to take over from Biden, or if you just thought Biden was big to be re-elected, I don't think you're feeling too good about those prospects now.
No, but he's without being ageist here, he is getting on a bit, and this is an awful lot for him to take. And you can see, obviously, I even can kind of have to take, the language of Harris is slightly distancing herself from Biden in some respects, and herself almost looking forward to that, that re-election, obviously.
Yeah, although Harris's approval ratings have also suffered a bit, and generally speaking, there was probably, again, not great reasons, but there was probably a reason as to why Kamala Harris, didn't get nearly as far as Joe Biden did in the campaign. I mean, you'd still have a strong chance from her position, with Biden being quite a very old president, and being vice president, allowing you to be in part of the national focus. But I don't think it's absolutely a slam dunk. She becomes a nominee unopposed, and you have the issue basically of a catch-22. If things are going really well, then people will ask, well, why not 4 more years of Biden, if things are going really well by that point? And if things are going really badly, people will then think, do we want somebody so publicly associated with that administration? I just think those are questions for Harris backers to ask themselves.
Lots to look forward to, William.
So elsewhere, the third thing to look forward to is party conference season, the return of the party conferences. I'll be there at both Labour and the Conservative Party conferences, both which are taking place in person. And I think it's fair to say there's something always happening with Labour. Most recently, the Unite election, the election to be the General Secretary of Unite, I should say, that was won by, of all people, Sharon Graham. And the really interesting thing for this is that Gerard Coyne who was seen as, well, he was the Labour candidate, the Labour right candidate, sorry, I should say, was going against two figures, both of the left. And the race was really looking to be quite tight, honestly. A couple of days beforehand, people had it as margin of error between all three candidates. I think it's fair to say Graham was a bit of a shock result. Only the Exchange are betting for it. I think she'd have been outsider of three, if that was the case. And we had a fixed odds market on it. Her victory could be perceived as, I think, a blow for Keir Starmer, possibly, although not a huge significant one. He's still in control of the party. Lots left have exited, but Labour Party conferences are never really quiet affairs, and there's going to be a lot of discontent, I think, still there. Starmer has been in place for over a year now. He's got a lot of work still to do, but he was, argued for on the basis of being an electable person, and somebody who could close the poll gap between Labour and the Conservatives. That's not really happening, I think, at the pace some would have hoped for across the board, which is basically my even-handed reading of it. Amongst the likes of Redfield and Wilton and YouGov, the Conservatives still have a really comfortable lead. It's tighter elsewhere, but even taking sort of margin of error moves, Labour, if you had the general election tomorrow, would absolutely, I do not think, be in a position to win. You could say, William, you're giving Starmer a very hard time. It's a very short run, and I would appreciate that, but there's a lot going on there, and I would expect some fireworks at some point.
And Boris has given up the booze until Christmas.
I did not know that. I genuinely did not know that. Is that true?
Not sure Boris did either. In solidarity with his missus, he's given up the booze until Christmas.
Well, it can be a hell of a task.
How do you price it?
Are we saying that we've got sort of a secret seeing eye and we can see in his office?
In this hypothetical scenario, yes, we have. So we know if it happened or not, even if he says it didn't.
Freeze on to break it. That's probably Probably falls on to break it.
Actually, the biggest rake ever. I mean, that is the worst shout ever on the polling station. It's 101 lay only. And I think Boris would agree.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of issues for the government, there are quite a lot of them. Firstly, the supply issue. Just in everything, supplying labour, supply to supermarkets, supply for construction materials, all of that. This sounds sort of very complicated, and you might wonder, well, William, what does this have to do in terms of political betting, whatever? But if the government has, through this year, had quite a big spike thanks to the initial success of the vaccine rollout, we're seeing that hold to a reasonable extent. And I think through summer, although hospitalizations are not low, I think it's worth saying that. As we get into the oncoming months, you have issues such as winter forcing more people to be inside, a booster jabs program, getting kids back to schools and universities, which is dangerous if they haven't been double jabbed. And then, of course, the end of the furlough scheme, the end of those support schemes, the end basically of the huge amounts of stimulus that you've had over the last year and a half, which have been absolutely necessary. How does that affect Rishi Sunak, who is still currently the favourite to be the next Prime Minister, but who, in theory, has only one place for his ratings to go, right? Which I would suggest would be down. So I think there are quite a few questions for the government to answer, and I wonder if that translates into polls. But it'll be an interesting Tory conference there, not just because of that reason, but also because the Boris Johnson factor tends to extend more to people who like Boris Johnson rather than people inside the Tory party. There's been a lot of discontent. Again, Afghanistan is one area, and it seemed members of the cabinet be put under pressure too, noticeably Dominic Raab.
Yeah, to succeed Boris Johnson, 9-4 Rishi Sunak, 7-2 Keir Starmer, 8 Michael Gove, and 10-1 Barr, including Dominic Raab, at 18-1. It's going to be an interesting year. I think between Brexit, obviously, and the pandemic, all those things, and it is very true. It's what are on your supermarket shelves. Actually, people's core values do matter, and Boris is going to have to ride a few storms.
He absolutely is. Mind, nothing is brought him down yet, and I don't expect to get close to a situation where he is brought down. But this is going to be a situation of really sustaining pressure on the government with things that matter to people. And if 3 or 4 things go wrong and they keep going wrong, I think it'd be interesting to see how the polls move. Am I saying winter of discontent? No, but the government has quite a few potholes to avoid. Just quickly to round off the other 2 things to look forward to. These are a bit more into winter, but there's a New York gubernatorial election. That's next year, but some of the names in the betting, or the likely contenders, I should say, very interesting. Kathy Hochul, Cynthia Nixon, Kirsten Gillibrand, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, maybe even potentially, although his mayoral run was a bust, you could have Andrew Yang there. So that'll be interesting. Then of course there is the political situation in California, where Gavin Newsom has been under some pressure. So American politics has things going on outside of just the president and the vice president, and it will be interesting to see how that develops over the coming months.
It's been great having you back, William.
Great to be back. And by the way, if you've made it this far, do not miss this week's Betting People. Got a very interesting guest, and I really, really hope you'll like the interview.
You're taking it from William Kedjanyi. You're taking it from, if not God himself, something very close. Thank you, William.
Thank you very much.